Marilyn Monroe, one of the brightest stars of the 20th century, is also the center of one of Hollywood's most debated mysteries. For decades, people have questioned what really happened the night she died. We've all heard the same version of her story, but what if the version leaves things out?
Hi, guys. Welcome back to the third episode of Don't Quote Us. I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Janan.
And today we're diving into conspiracy theories surrounding Marilyn Monroe and one of the most famous members of the Beatles, Paul McCartney.
To start off, let's talk about Monroe and her alleged connections to two extremely powerful figures at the time, John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy. Marilyn Monroe was already one of the most famous women in the world, and rumors began circulating that she had a brief relationship with JFK in early 1962. Some sources also suggest that she may have had a more serious connection with Robert Kennedy.
Right, and this is where these conspiracy theories start to build. One of the biggest claims is that Monroe kept a personal diary, sometimes referred to as the Little Red Book, where she supposedly wrote about sensitive information about their meetings and things like political secrets and details about her relationship with the Kennedys. Now, there's no confirmed proof of this diary, but it plays a huge role in a lot of the conspiracy theories.
Exactly. The idea that Marilyn Monroe really did have that kind of information, she could have been seen as a threat. Some theories say that as the Kennedy brothers started distancing themselves from her, Monroe became upset and may have threatened to go public with everything she knew. If that were true, it could have created a serious political scandal.
I think what makes this case so interesting is how much it depends on the what if of the story. If there was ever the actual diary, if she was actually planning to expose the JFK and all the other Kennedys. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's where this conspiracy theory gets so much attention.
No, yeah, I agree. And also I feel like it's kind of hard to see where the facts end and where the speculation begins because on one hand, these are powerful people, but on the other hand, there's like a lot of solid evidence that show that this could have been a big scam.
Yeah, and another theory takes things even further to claim that Robert F. Kennedy may have been directly involved with her death. Some accounts suggest that he was actually at her home the day that she died. Another record says that he was somewhere else entirely, like in San Francisco. That contradiction alone has kept theories alive for years.
These are all claims from people like private investigators who said Monroe had relationship with both brothers and may have had a heated argument with Robert Kennedy shortly before her death. Actor Peter Lawford is sometimes mentioned too, with some stories suggesting he tries to manage the situation as things became more unstable.
Yeah, and some of these conspiracies theories even suggest that Monroe wasn't found dead right away, and there may have been a delay or even a cover up before authorities were hauled. And these ideas often include claims that law enforcement and powerful figures work together to hide what really happened in this case.
But when we look at the official investigation, the conclusions are very different. In 1982, the Los Angeles County District Attorney reviewed the case and found no credible evidence of the murder. The official cause of death remains a probable suicide. Donald Spoto also argued that there's no solid proof for a long term affair or a murder plot and suggested that Monroe may have died from an accidental overdose instead.
So it really just does come down to interpretation. It's, do you trust the official investigation, or do you want to kind of part off and think about conspiracy theories, which is always a thing that you can do. There's so many conspiracy theories, and I think it's interesting to look at them but remain focused on both sides and don't just take too much of one side and then get hyper fixated on that. But I think conspiracy theories, obviously there's some truth behind them, and I think there could be some truth behind this one. And so I think that's why it's so interesting, because it really is like a deep state, very important political kind of thing. And this affair would be big if it were to come out as like solid proof.
No, yeah, and I feel like people are naturally drawn to like the bigger idea and like the bigger story of it, especially when it involves celebrities and politics. Like people care about these people and they like to know different drama that's going around with them. But sometimes like the simplest explanation may actually be the short truth, and people are just like dragging it more and more to make it sound more dramatic or sure, just like to entertain other people. But honestly, the simple truth could just that may just be the truth.
Okay, now let's switch gears to the music history. And one of the most famous conspiracy theories of all music involves Paul McCartney from the Beatles. This theory is known as the Paul is dead theory, and it began in 1969 when fans began to believe that Paul McCartney had actually died in a car crash. in 1966 and was secretly replaced by a lookalike.
Yeah, and according to this theory, this replacement, sometimes called William Campbell or Billy Shears, took Paul's place in the band, and the rest of the Beatles supposedly left clues in their music and album covers. One of the most famous examples is the cover of Abbey Road, where the band is walking across the street.
Yeah, and fans interpreted that image as a funeral progression, which it had John Lennon dressed in white like a priest, and Ringo Starr in black like a mourner, Paul barefoot and out of the steps like a corpse, and George Harrison was in denim as a gravedigger. And it's really detailed interpretation, even though it was never intended to be that way, or that's what we think.
Another big clue comes from the song Strawberry Fields Forever, where some listeners believe they heard John Lennon say, I buried Paul at the end. Lennon later clarified that he actually said cranberry sauce, but that didn't stop people from believing it was evidence.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting. And another thing is that there was also the song Glass Onion, and this refers to another Beatles song. Some fans connected it to imagery from the Magical Mystery Tour, especially the walrus costume, which some people would symbolize thinks it symbolized death.
No, yeah, and I do think this is like a really crazy and like wild theory because people really connected all these tiny details and into like a full story. Like people looked at every single song and saw little clues that can connect this whole theory together.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's again true for all theories. It's really up to interpretation because if you're listening for clues,
Yeah.
or if you're looking for clues, you're probably going to find them even if they are not intended to be clues. So I think that's super interesting to look at and how many of these clues that people have found. And I just wonder if they're all true or not, or what this whole
No,
place
yeah.
is.
And also I feel like also what I said earlier, people could like be looking at this like a little bit too much into detail. So like you honestly never know. But I could see this like the clues are really interesting to like connect it all together.
Okay, so for a little bit more on Paul McCartney, some fans have claimed that he looked and sounded different after 1966, pointing to changes in his face, height, posture, and even his voice. But again, none of this has ever been proven, so we cannot guarantee anything, but it is just speculation.
In response to all these rumors, McCartney eventually spoke out in 1969 saying the theory wasn't true and that he had simply been spending time with his wife, Linda McCartney, on their farm in Scotland. But interestingly, this didn't completely stop the rumors.
Right, and because some people thought he sounded too calm or too casual, which made him even more suspicious, and over time, though the Paul's Dead theory became less of a serious belief, it was more of a popular culture joke.
So, looking at both these cases, and it's interesting to see how conspiracy theories can take on a life of their own.
Yeah, and whether it's unanswered questions or just people connecting patterns, these stories stick around because they are intriguing, even if they aren't proven or there's not a ton of evidence behind them.
Yeah, but overall, all of this is very interesting and everyone has their own opinions, but this is just like information we've gotten about it. But that's it for today's episode.
And honestly, I just want to close this out by saying I don't know about either. I feel like if I were to agree with one or the other, I think that the Marilyn Monroe one is super interesting. I think there's a possibility there. There are a few things that are a little bit weird about the situation, and so I think that's odd. But I do think that the McCartney one was a bit of a stretch.
Uh-huh. Also, I just think like the Beatles one, it's crazy that they put it in their music and there's so many clues that can like correlate it all together and show that the theory is true. And that like some people they look at into all their songs so much and like can make all these predictions about it.
For sure. I hope you guys can tune in next week for our next episode about aliens. We're going to have a ton of super interesting information on them, and I think it's going to be super curious and interesting podcast.
Yes, it will be. Okay, bye. Bye.